Well, um, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I am Milene Mendes de Oliveira, the organizer of the ReDICo 2024 Encounters, together with my colleague, Luisa Conti. We are here today to talk to you about our project in an exercise to collectively reconstruct, present, and discuss our reflections within the project ReDICo, Researching Digital Interculturality Co-operatively, funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research from 2020 to 2024. Before we get into business and start the actual presentation, I'd like to invite my colleague Luisa to show something really interesting to you, namely the ReDICo Hub. Luisa.
Yeah, hello to everybody. I'm very happy to see you here in our last encounter. So I guess I have to show you a very important part for you, that is the hub. So we already told you a little bit about the stream which was going to come through, and now it is true. So you're the first one who will see it. And they are also the first one, except of ourselves, that can already start to make your profile, inserting your publication, yours or publication you know that are really very relevant and interesting for others in relation to digital interculturality. So I present you now the ReDICo Hub. Milene will show us how it looks like, the first page. So here you find the possibility to inform about call for papers. If you hear about call for papers related to the wide range of topics around digital interculturality, please insert them here. So share them with us. If you are looking for a job, look over here. Or maybe if you know about interesting jobs or internships, you can post them here. So there is about jobs, about call for papers, about publications, about people, so about yourself and organizations in which you work, for example. If you think they are relevant, please feel free to join this hub and to enrich it. Above all, you present today are the most important people, because are the ones who can help us to make it a little bit bigger until much more people join us. So we will do soon an official bigger launch of the hub, and it would be great if you can help us to fill it more and more, so that when people come, have the feeling it's really happening lots of things there, and will stay, and then it will really work as a community meeting point, yeah, where we can continue to share information, knowledge, and to get in contact with each other. Milene, would you like to show also here a couple of other pages? And here is the most important part, because it's the link to the hub. I'm quite excited to show it to you, because as I said, you're the first ones. If you notice any bug and so on, please let us know. And otherwise, feel free to insert your information, your profile, and so on. So the link will also be posted in the chat, but otherwise you have here the QR code to have direct access to it. So if you have any questions, you can write in the chat or write to us after that, or just stay with us at the end of the presentation today. I wouldn't spend more time on this, because today it's a very important day for us, because we're showing you the hub, but also because we are showing or presenting you some of the core learnings that we have been gaining in the last years. So that we want to keep space for that and for the discussion afterwards. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for joining the hub. Very welcome to both things. And I give the word back to Milene.
Thank you, Luisa. Well, yes, I'm very happy to get us started into the presentation. Here's the program for today. So we will start with an introduction in which we quickly review the main topics of each of the previous encounters, And then I'll give you some information about the ReDICo members, so as to explain our disciplinary influences and where we speak from, so to say. The main part of the talk is divided as follows. We'll be speaking about internet studies as a field that influenced our early reflections. And Fergal will then offer a critique of intercultural new media studies. And after that, he and Luisa will walk us through the Own Life Manifesto by Floridi and give us some context for what comes next. And what comes next is an attempt to describe the concepts and theories that have influenced our understanding of digital interculturality. Fergal will walk us through the first points with a detailed description of sociocultural theories. As you'll see, one of the theoretical resources he mentions is Hugginbotham's theory of culture and interculturality. And because this theory is so important to us in the project, we will extend on this. And both Luisa and Broman will give us an in-depth overview that brings together Bolton's original thoughts and more recent reflections upon how the digital or the post-digital has a bearing on what we conceptualize as culture. Finally, Luisa and Broman will be talking about the theory of culture and interculturality by Bolton, and also in relation to the theory or theories of post-digitality. And then afterwards, I'll be speaking from my position as an applied and sociolinguist about practices of digital interculturality. We expect this presentation to take around 70 or 75 minutes, and after that, we'll have a discussion with the audience, and we'd be happy to hear your views. All right, so yes. Okay, so let's get started. For this talk, we had premised to A, summarize the contributions and insights from the previous sessions, and B, offer a series of theoretical reflections and empirical perspectives on the notion of digital interculturality, integrating it into a broader reflection on the evolution of the field of intercultural communication. It's been 6 weeks of ReDICo encounters now. For me, to look back on the event description we first came up with as a teaser for the encounters and compare it with all the topics that arose de facto from the event is a very interesting experience. What was originally thought of as a methodological and paradigmatic conversation between intercultural communication and sociolinguistics turned out to go much beyond these initial intentions. We were actually taken into a journey in which we discussed ethical implications of AI into intercultural and intracultural communication, and also new post-human approaches to the study of interculturality that promised to defy or question or probably even break the very foundations of what we describe as research. But we also talked about everyday practices, practices in which we put digital interculturality into action, such as when we use language technologies, for instance, translation apps, to mediate interactions in migration settings or support or optimize recruiting processes in companies. Speaking of practices, we also heard about practices happening in and formatted in accordance to digital platforms, from interactional moves in chat rooms to storytelling on TikTok. Finally, we were invited to consider how an intersectional perspective is important in studying the use of digital media by economically disadvantaged groups. Participation and ethnographic methods were also highlighted to help prevent deterministic conclusions in these studies. They led the speakers to unveil practices of resilience and unlearning of colonial legacies. As you know, the subtitle of the encounters is Interdisciplinary Perspectives on Digital Interculturality. Interdisciplinarity was not explored only on the meta level through the online talks, but became itself the very essence of a non-site data session in Jena, where researchers and PhD students from several disciplinary orientations discussed a 5-minute excerpt of the intercultural game data I collected from my ReDICo study. Interdisciplinarity is also represented within our group. We are 4 researchers based in Germany, but each of us with a different disciplinary background. So it's important to state our positionality as researchers, as our personal and research trajectories will certainly influence our views on digital interculturality. First of all, Roman Lietz, Fergal Lenehan, and Luisa Conti worked closely together with Jürgen Bolten, a professor of intercultural studies at the University of Jena, who came to shape the discourse on interculturality and intercultural competence in Germany. Luisa is active in the field of intercultural education and has several funded projects on digital tools and intercultural dialogue. Roman has worked on practical projects dealing with the integration of migrant groups in Germany, for example, through sports associations. His studies reflect this focus on integration and processes of reciprocity in intercultural spheres. Fergal has a background in cultural history, and his ReDICo studies have led him to internet studies, cosmopolitanism, among other sociocultural fields and theories. I was not a student of Jürgen Bolten, and my background is applied linguistics and sociolinguistics. I am interested in the use of English as a lingua franca, and more broadly speaking, sociolinguistic processes that can hopefully help us unveil intercultural processes. In the reflections that come, you'll be probably able to see that our backgrounds impact the very questions each of us asks in relation to digital interculturality. One of the several ways to explore our interdisciplinarity was to work collaboratively on the organization of conferences. We call them eco-conferences in reference to the environmentally friendly nature of the idea, because they were online conferences, as well as its collaborative spirit. The topics of the conferences were based on our academic backgrounds and research orientations. The first of our conferences had a focus on intercultural education and was organized by Luisa and Fergal. The second one had a focus on sociopolitical theories and was organized by Roman and Fergal. For this third one, given my interests in applied and sociolinguistics, as I mentioned, I decided to bring intercultural communication together with sociolinguistics. However, in our program for today, in reflecting upon the whole ReDICo project, we want to open up and move beyond intercultural communication and sociolinguistics. Later on, when we're talking about practices and empirical findings, I'll certainly refer back to sociolinguistics when I talk to you about online communication and communicative and interactional practices. For now, I would like to invite my colleague Roman to open the theoretical discussions, which will then be deepened by Fergal and Luisa. After some reflections on internet studies, intercultural media studies, and the presentation of the OnLife manifesto, Fergal will walk us through the theoretical resources that inform the notion of digital interculturality and will be followed by Luisa. Roman.
Yeah, thank you, Milene, for this beautiful introduction. So, as you said, this conference has a focus on sociolinguistics, but you also mentioned that there are a lot of interdisciplinary perspectives, and here is one of them. So I want to go back a little bit to the first days of ReDICo. Yeah, when we came together to plan this project in early 2019, for us as scholars of intercultural communication, a new momentum was the integration now of the digital, yeah, something new at that moment, or something that appeared new to us to bring into discussion. And by this, internet studies came into play. So Fergal and I appeared at the Intercultural Summer Academy that took place at Jena in 2021. And there we focused on internet studies and how they parallel with intercultural studies. The massive impact of the digitalization, of course, you know, also impacts interculturality and literally zooms interculturality into our private spaces, like today. Regarding intercultural studies, I want to recall that they have made a journey since the 1950s, from dealing then mainly with elite intercultural encounters and assignments that happened somewhere there abroad, towards then the 1980s and especially 1990s, when intercultural studies began to deal with more mundane encounters of students, migrants, and so on. And then newly, since the 21st century, I would say intercultural studies have dealt more with also digital intercultural encounters, and these happen everywhere and are not at all as elite and extraordinary as intercultural encounters used to be way back in the 1950s. So maybe for now, as a first statement from my side, two things are ubiquitous. They are everywhere and we cannot hide from them. Now, that's on the one hand digitality, and this is something a lot of people are indeed aware of, but also interculturality is ubiquitous and everywhere happening and interfering with us. And now Fergal, I suppose, is the best choice for us to dig more into the interplay of internet studies and interculturality. Fergal.
Yeah, thanks, Roman. Yeah, one of the most sustained, if maybe not wholly successful, attempts to bring together aspects of intercultural communication, scholarship, and internet studies has been called intercultural new media studies. Mutsvaro and Salgado describe intercultural new media studies as scholarly attempts to fathom ways through which ICTs, new media, and digital technologies relate to and affect intercultural communication. The same authors see in intercultural new media studies ways in which new media affect and shape communication between users who do not share a cultural background. Robert Schurter, who is sort of the main protagonist behind intercultural new media studies, in texts from 2012 and 2017, has set out, to a certain extent at least, the parameters of intercultural new media studies and really asks more questions than anything else, valid enough as these also are. He argues for more intercultural new media investigations that include two or more cultures, as multiple culture investigations are essential for generating comparative cultural data on the social uses of social media. We would critique intercultural new media studies from a variety of perspectives, arguing that it does not really provide a sustainable approach, has become actually quite outdated, and would indeed need updating in relation to its understanding of the internet, especially, but also in relation to notions of culture and culturality and interculturality, as well as agency and materiality. Yeah, then Luisa is going to tell us now something more on the On Life Manifesto.
Yeah, thank you. One important critique you refer to, Fergal, is the distinction done by new media studies between material and digital reality, which is today actually anachronistic. Yeah, already 2015, the Online Manifesto has been published, highlighting with the term On Life the entanglement of the digital and the material reality. Next slide. Indeed, information and communication technologies are having a radical impact on the human condition. So ECTs, so as I said, information and communication technologies are not mere tools. Yeah. So it's not just technique, but rather environmental forces that are increasingly affecting our self-conception, who we are, our mutual interactions, how we socialize, our conception of reality, and our interaction with reality, so our agency. So they refer to four major transformations we are experiencing. The blurring of the distinction between reality and virtuality. We have already talked about that. The blurring of the distinction between human, machine, and nature. Dominic Bush spoke a lot about that in the encounters. The reversal from information scarcity to information abundance. maybe a richness, but maybe we don't really use it, or maybe too rich. That is open questions we can discuss later about. And then the shift from the primacy of standalone things, properties, and binary relations to the primacy of interactions, processes, and networks. And that reminds the two modernities of Beck's, yeah, which Jürgen Boelten has taken and brought into the intercultural communication studies.
Yeah, thanks, Luisa. So, yeah, we would argue actually for a new orientation for a sort of a pluralistic digital interculturality studies, which draws on a number of theoretical resources. I'd just like to give you an overview of these theoretical resources before we go into them further. Post-digital theory is especially important here and is to a certain extent the sort of the mirror image of the online manifesto, I think, actually. This includes earlier forms of post-digital theory, such as von Kramer, who argues that the post in post-digital does not mean the end of digitality, but the opposite, its ubiquity, as Roman has already stated. This argues that the material and the digital have become largely intertwined and inseparable, and that a new-old media dichotomy does not make sense anymore, as the new media aren't new anymore. Later theorists, such as Knox, brought this theory forward and argue that post-digitality means also the interconnectedness of our life world to various economic and social systems. And when we're talking about economic and social systems, then the key word here is, of course, platform and platformization. And yeah, platformization has advanced thinking about the internet, and we would actually see the internet as a patchwork of platforms. Okay, and we'll talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. We would also see central here an understanding of agency that is actually indebted to the philosophy and theory of agency, especially systematic agency. The digital world embedded with the material as it is opens up actually new avenues of agency and new types of agency, which you also need to deal with and examine. An emphasis is also important here. We would argue on the in relation to materiality, okay, the importance of materiality as evident and drawn from, for example, from media archaeology. And this is leading us to an orientation towards the ubiquity of contacts, which are also not realized, and are also, we would sort of argue that we also need to think about contacts which are not allowed to become realized for various reasons. Then a more complex understanding of culturality and interculturality is definitely necessary in relation to digital interculturality studies. And we would definitely feel that the work of Jürgen Boelten should be better known outside of Germany. And I suppose we would like to center his work here and to introduce it to new audiences. And Luisa and Roman will provide further context here later on in the presentation. And lastly, and more practically thinking, I suppose, rather than theoretically thinking, we would emphasize the examination of practices in digital intercultural contexts and spaces. And Milene will provide more context here later on. Okay. Yeah, okay, so post-digitality also highlights the ways that digital technologies mean that people and their life worlds are inherently embedded in and entangled with existing social practices and economic and political systems. And this discussion has been taken over to a certain extent, at least, by the term platformization and the arguments that power online has moved towards corporate-owned platforms. So Powell, Nieborg, and Van Dijk have advanced thinking on platformization as a post-digital phenomenon by suggesting a two-pronged definition which views platformization from a software and political economy perspective as the penetration of the infrastructures, economic processes, and governmental frameworks of platforms in different economic sectors and spheres of life. Okay, so that platforms have become central to economics and central to various forms of social life, while a cultural perspective on platformization may be viewed as the reorganization of cultural practice and imaginations around platforms. Platformization has had an immense post-digital impact and has changed the life world in many diverse ways, not least in the West and via platforms such as Amazon, Google, and Apple. Davis, for example, has shown in an innovative article how Amazon has transformed many aspects of the publishing industry, in what he calls a hybrid post-digital environment where digital and human practices intermingle. The platform, as a digital informational structure, now also has a fundamental and also post-digital role in the global economy. Cohn emphasizes that the platform is not simply a new business model, a new social technology, or a new infrastructural formation, although it is all of those. Rather, it constitutes the core organizational form of the emerging informational economy. Platformization has transformed, for example, the media industry, the working world. The key word here is, of course, the gig economy, and also, to a certain extent at least, the context of teaching. Cohn has convincingly argued that platforms represent infrastructure-based strategies for introducing friction into networks, and the internet, formerly known for its openness and often called a network of networks, is becoming actually a network of platforms. Thus, platforms represent the bordering of the internet, the creation of at times exclusive and walled micro-worlds existing on the wider internet, often in an unsystematic way and not necessarily connected with other platforms. The contemporary internet is thus a partly disjointed and haphazard patchwork of platforms, some aspects of which may indeed be interconnected, but this structure does not warrant the term network anymore, suggestive as this term is of a systematic and interconnected structure. Systematic interconnection is now no longer an aspect of the wider internet. It is conducted rather within platforms, on the platform's terms, and with platforms acting as communicative molding agents. Platformization and the power of platforms has changed the whole context of intercultural communication online. Okay, so to move on to the next sort of theoretical resource, which we think is central to digital interculturality studies, we definitely need to unpack new forms of digital agency. The person A meets person B, and then they somehow negotiate interculture C paradigm is still at the center of intercultural communication, but needs radical rethinking for digital forms of intercultural communication. The philosophy and theory of agency can help here, we would argue. Early conceptualizations of agency from the philosophy of action, such as von Anscombe and Davidson, argued that actions should be seen as connected with intentionality. Later conceptualizations have thrown this open, such as the concept of systematic agency. So, for example, Bandrian, De Paulo, and Woda see a system as an agent in the sense that a system is generally doing something by itself according to certain goals or norms within a specific environment, and three different, though interrelated, aspects of agency follow immediately. A, there is a system of indistinguishable there is a system as a distinguishable entity that is different from its environment. B, this system is doing something by itself in that environment. And C, it does so according to a certain goal or norm. Systematic agency is one of the key forms of hybrid agency. These agentive systems are hybrid in the sense that they contain an often vast array of agentive fragments. And by that I mean little pieces of doing, little things that people have done, possibly even in a relatively historical context, that are often clouded, but can still be central to systematic agency and our contact with systematic agents. Okay, so to look at some examples actually of central systematic agents in the post-digital world, we have constant contact with artificial intelligence online. Hillis sees artificial intelligence as a form of collective and hybrid intelligence, usually connected to the aims and goals of nation states and or corporations. Rodney Jones, in the discussion following his paper during the Encounter series, stated that intelligence is maybe the wrong term here for AI. And he is backed up here, for example, by Montemayor, who suggests that artificial intelligence should be seen as a form of collective epistemic agency, being collective in their needs and motivations, and collective also in their attention to routines and goals. At the center of artificial intelligence is a variety of agentive fragments, some of which, of course, are quite dominant. Yeah, another form of systematic agency, which is central to the internet, is of course, algorithms. Romulo has stated that algorithms mean that some digital technologies retain a type of imagination in which algorithms organize data according to a certain coherence. And the example that he uses in his book is the Facebook video features Friends Day or the Year in Review, in which algorithms engage in narrativizing the user experience on the web, meaning that algorithms also retain a type of hermeneutic agency, a type of interpretive agency. Algorithms also retain a type of systematic agency and are indebted to potentially millions of agentive fragments gleaned from databases. As Chon and Nascimento have shown, systematic layers are digital metaphors and analogies implemented in relation to software and hardware to make them easier to negotiate. Most classically, of course, the idea of the mouse. An algorithm suggestion, for example, is reimagined as a customer service on a platform such as Amazon. The authors argue that semantic layers have increasing influence in the material life world and have come to change some pre-digital meanings. Okay, and one of the examples they use is the idea of friendship and how Facebook has changed our concept of friendship. Semantic layers should be seen also as forms of systematic agency, I would argue, or we would argue, as they also carry clouded agentive fragments, usually gleaned from the corporate cultures of the various platforms themselves. Okay, again, looking at a macro theoretical level, we would argue here for a substantive material turn, actually, in relation to digital intercultural communication, inspired by Foucaultian media archaeology. This means analyzing digital intercultural communication in terms of agentive fragments, but it also means viewing relevant context in relation to the materiality of inclusions and exclusions, the said and the unsaid, the influential agentive fragments above and around the internet, seen in this instance as a series of technological discursive systems. Media archaeology insists on the materiality and material ecologies of media objects, systems, and processes, according to Godard. This means that in media archaeology, the object of study is not what is said or written, but the fact, the brute and often brutal fact, that it is said, that this and rather not something else is inscribed. And this is an analytical level that shouldn't be ignored, we would argue. The influence of Foucault on media archaeology is clear here, I think. Foucault writes that the manifest discourse is really no more than the repressive presence of what it does not say. And this, at our remove, seems almost like an early version of the "your silence is deafening" social media cliche. This means an approach to digital interculturality, which is oriented towards examining agentive fragments which stop contacts from being realized, an orientation towards the discourses and contexts that are not realized, and the fragments that halt them. We would see this in practical terms as both a macro and a micro undertaking. A macro approach would examine, for example, the hybrid intelligences of nation states and corporate cultures and their incorporation of systematic agency. This would include here the banning of certain platforms in certain contexts, okay, for example, in China, Iran, and Russia, but there's also discussion ongoing, as we know, in the United States and also here in Germany in relation to TikTok. And this would also look at how internet users react to and get around these types of banning. But it would also include the inclusions and exclusions of corporate cultures. And I suppose the erratic behavior of Elon Musk in relation to the platform Twitter is here an example. At the data session we had with Ben Rampton in Jena, which was a wonderful experience, we had a very interesting example of how this could be done in the context of a simulation game on a Zoom meeting. So a micro context, a very micro context. A participant who didn't feature in the transcript attempted to participate, but was sidetracked by having to talk to someone beside her in the materiality of her own room. Maybe a sister, maybe her father or mother, maybe a friend. We don't know and weren't able to find out. While the same person's internet access kept coming and going and stopping her from contributing. So very, very material agentive fragments which stopped certain types of contacts from being fully realized. Okay, then Luisa.
Yeah, thank you, Fergal. You brought up very interesting points. Reflecting on the multiplicity of agents, it's important to name the digital divide, as not all agents are equally powerful, including the human users. So Van Dijk differentiates disparities in terms of access and skills, but also in terms of the potential to reap the benefits of digitalization, considering its impact on the economy, on politics, and society in general. Digital inequalities are a reproduction of the intersectional matrix of inequalities permeating societies. Not by chance, Chihit and Bosta, as explained in our last encounter, could identify patterns of social digital disadvantage. Though going beyond the barriers linked to the first two levels of the digital divide, further factors can be identified which perpetuate oppression online. Let's think of hate speech. According to these recent studies published by the organization Neue MedienmacherInnen, which were guests at our last ECO conference, individuals with a visible migration background, young women, and people with homosexual or bisexual orientation are particularly affected. Though digitality does shake a bit the matrix of inequalities, while some lose agency, others gain it, and the impact of their action can be substantial. Let's think of haters who can destroy with their words the victim's well-being. Or let's think of marginalized people. Digital tools are therefore also, like in case of marginalized people, instruments fostering resilience. They offer the chance of making hear one's own voice. Many tools are helpful to cope with challenges, such as the linguistic ones, for example. They offer free access to a load of knowledge and even the chance to develop one's own skills. Yeah, let's think of tutorials, for example. The possibility to nurture an existing connection and forming new ones in another important advantage and benefit which the digital represents. Digitality itself has the potential to favor a sustainable transformation of our complex, dynamic, and globalized reality. In this picture, you can see Jürgen Bolton, who called on us at our first ECO conference, and sadly his last one, to embark on a journey of conscious societal transformation, advocating for a holistic perspective rather than isolated individuals seeking self-preservation disconnected from any sense of collectivity. As a condition for success, he saw the will and the competence of engaging with uncertainty by sharing expertise and resources. I have inserted here the GIF I showed in the first encounter, which represents the metaphor that Jürgen Bolton loved to use for explaining intercultural competence, the roller coaster. Precisely this ability to understand uncertainty not as a menace, but as a challenge, and to cope with it in a constructive manner while creating new fragile normalities is what Jürgen Bolton in his extensively published work has defined as intercultural competence. In this framework, interculturality denotes the encounter with the unfamiliar, while culturality represents the fabric of easily decipherable familiar multiplicity.
Thank you, Luisa. This is a very nice transition that shows us that notions of culture and interculturality are actually central in our undertaking concerning defining a frame for the notion of digital interculturality. So, as I mentioned earlier, we'll open the space now for a thorough explanation of the ideas and theories that inform our understanding of culture and interculturality. And for that, I'd like to invite Roman to take the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in this part of the presentation, we want to talk about process of processes of culture creation. And we would start it then from a micro perspective with the social agents, yeah, and their social constructions in the center. And again, this connects a lot to what we just heard about agency, thanks to Fergal and Luisa. So going to a very micro level, on the first layer, the persons who interact on the internet are, of course, interacting as individuals. Yeah, they do something in the internet and by this create an online persona. Yeah, persona, this is a term here, is the aspects of personality that we present to others. Then at the early stages of the internet, there was a famous cartoon, yeah, you see it here, where a dog praised the internet because there it could appear as somebody anonymous and totally different from who it actually was. However, today, of course, we know that the self-presentation in the internet is very often rather homogeneous to our material life persona and not a distinction there between our online and material persona. So being authentic, yeah, is often one of the major drivers and values for the creation of the self, also in the virtual spheres. This is something we could also prove in one of our investigations about motivations and values of digital cosmopolitan personas. I've linked here the article and want to mention that again, that all our articles are published open access and you can get them online. However, next slide, please. Don't believe that an identity creating process or behavior is only a self-centered thing you're doing on the internet. In contrast, it is very, very much community oriented. So every action takes place in an interaction with an imagined or maybe actually an existent audience. So there are ongoing small but very often very relevant negotiations among these inhabitants of internet spaces. As these examples here from different of our research studies in the ReDICo project should reveal. So these different snippets here of communication are meant to first create an effective connectedness. Yeah? Then they shall establish a common frame for interpretation and a common sense of meaning. And some are meant to create a narration of belonging to a wider group. And of course, this does not entail only the creation of an in-group, but also the creation of an out-group. Yeah. So everything happens in communication snippets, and what undoubtedly is taking place here, and in so many more online discourses and practices, is the creation of culture. Yeah, that means that people are developing plausible and predictable meanings, and they're turning unfamiliarity into familiarity. This is also something Jürgen Bolton explained. And on this slide, I want to stay with Bolton because this creation of culture is taking place within a setting of fuzzy cultures. For those who don't know this theory or term, you get a small view into it here, and it's one of Bolton's famous thoughts. Bolton's famous thoughts. So here's an adaptation of Bolton's model that involves physical and virtual collectives. Here, a Minecraft-related community, an English learners Facebook group, and so on. You see them examples at the bottom of the slide. Of course, there are way more than these few collectives. These collectives are constituted on different now again platforms. Yeah, we were introduced to platformization already, and these collectives are constantly shaped and changed by a manifold number of members. Yeah, this is the line more or less in the middle of this slide. So a membership is not a positivistic category of, yes, I am a member of a certain collective, or no, I am not a member of this collective, but membership is a question of a degree of belonging. So degrees of belonging are here represented with a thickness of the lines. And this, again, you can remember, if you like, as an important clue in Bolton's model. As you see, the persons participate in these different communities with different degrees of belonging. So one person is influenced more or less by what is going on in one of his or her groups, and is also making a bigger or smaller influence himself to what is going on there. And that's reciprocity. There's a reciprocal relationship between collective and member. So, for example, it is more likely that the individual here would announce a Minecraft challenge, in one of his Minecraft groups, but it's not so likely that he would announce a vocabulary challenge in the English learners group, Facebook group, even though, he is factually member of both collectives. Not that he's not a member of the collective, but he's a member with a different degree of belonging. So what we basically see is an interplay of collectives, and different individuals communicate via collectives now with other individuals, and different collectives are in exchange via the individuals with each another. So therefore, cultures and belongings are shifting permanently, and this makes cultures in a way fuzzy, not clear, restricted, but fuzzy, and this is the fuzzy cultural idea of Jürgen Bolton.
Continuing Roman's reasoning, I'd like to stress that culturality emerges through the interactions of diverse individuals within a specific context, collective. No? That what the word that Roman used. Individuals move, as Roman's graphic shows, in various fields of action, so collectives, another way to say it, that was the Bolton's way, contributing on the one hand to shaping their personal yet intersubjective life world over time, and on the other hand, to the formation of their personal, multifaceted cultural identity. Hereby, I'd like to stress that the digital extension of the life world increases the diversification of the cultural identity of each of us, as we are less and less limited to the local, let's say, local offer of collectives. In our own life, encountering the unfamiliar, that is what we understand with Bolt as interculturality, is therefore a possibly ubiquitous experience, which occurs not only in unfamiliar contexts, but increasingly also within familiar contexts due to the increase of their fuzziness. So what is initially unfamiliar can evolve into being familiar. Interculturality transforms into culturality, while the horizon, using the word of Schutz and Luckmann, of one's own life world expands. Interculturality can therefore be understood as a transformative transition, enabling the assimilation of the new into the known, coupled with the simultaneous transformation of the self. Let's focus for a moment on this recursive transition from culturality to interculturality. This happens through conscious and unconscious learning processes which happen life-wide, at a click of a button 24/7, and lifelong every day until we are receptive. Hereby, I would like to refer to what Daniel Silva in our last encounter highlighted. On life, we are not just learning, but also unlearning. This is, for understanding digital interculturality, particularly interesting, as it stresses the fact that we are actively working on shaping our pool of cultural knowledge, which influence our perception, actions, and feelings. Though our learning experience is limited, we referred earlier to the digital divide, to platformization. There are also other aspects, such as our psychological mechanism. For example, the fact that we do prefer look at platforms which are familiar to us and where we will probably get confirmations rather than interesting but challenging new perspectives. So until short time ago, we also had language as a restriction. Languages were indeed our frontiers online. Though the browser add-ons for automatic translation extends our range of experience potentially to the infinite. So actually, we can see how the internet makes us more and more independent from local and national cultures. At the same time, national cultures, the standard entity of reference in the classical intercultural communication, become therefore less and less relevant for understanding individuals and interactions. Thinking of Jan Assmann's formula, culture is the dynamic interplay of communication, media, and collective memory. We can state that in the post-digital era, more than ever, we share bits of collective memories with people all over the world. Referring to the recurring question if we are facing a cultural homogenization of the world, McDonaldization. Yeah, next, please. I'd say yes, partly. Though, think on how platforms structure our ways of communicating, for example. Alexandra Georgakopoulou exemplified this, presenting her studies on digital storytelling. Now, everyone uses the same frames, the same websites, and that influence the way we communicate, but also at the end, the way in which we think our life, yeah, in our public life, which is quite almost the same by today. So, though, as argued earlier, all cultural elements are continuously taken and remixed with others in this never-ending recursive transition of culturality into interculturality into culturality, and so on. So we are influenced by a myriad of trans-local cultures, and we are connected to a myriad of trans-local communities, though we are conscious just of some of them, the ones we consciously recognize as groups. And these belongings can become very meaningful to us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luisa, and especially thank you for coming here up with notions of translocality and translocal communities, because I'm wondering if traditional ideas of locality don't have to be questions maybe now when we take digitality and post-digitality into account. So already for at least 2 decades, sociologists have been debating whether these virtual communities are indeed as real as communities that meet face-to-face and on a local basis. Yeah, and especially there's the question if these virtual communities are as effective and as bonding. So among others, Manuel Castells and John Orry have engaged with these questions. And although these debates are 20-year old, they are still relevant to our times, I suppose. So nowadays, I think it's clear that communities that are not localized in a physical sense also have all these substances of a true community, as Uri called it. So John Urry came here up with the term of new forms of virtual mobility. And I think this is very noteworthy because John Urry was a social geographer. And geography, as we know, engages a lot with physical mobility. Yeah, and here he stated and talked about virtual communities and virtual mobilities. He stated that in virtual communities, of course, we still meet and we meet face to face, but in virtual communities, we have to give additional meanings to the terms meet and face nowadays. I suppose you today can connect this to your very own current social practices. So what you do on the internet, I don't know, learning, working, dating, shopping, caring, consoling, coaching, integrating, participation, and many, many other concepts that actually in the past were linked a lot to a physical local presence. They are carried out today probably still on a local level, but the locus is the internet. And additionally here, I want to give a short attention to the weak ties Castells is introducing here with his quote. For those who don't know the terms, there's a differentiation between strong ties. They are established among close friends and so on, while weak ties are the ties you have with casual acquaintances. And these weak ties are very important for the embeddedness and the structure of a social network. Yeah? They allow the communication in between people and networks. However, the maintenance of weak ties and the transformation of them into strong ties is maybe, or I'm quite sure, more difficult to establish and more difficult to maintain in a virtual environment. We can take our very conference today. Yeah, in a material conference, a lot of weak ties would have been established or refreshed in between you here in the audience. Yeah, for example, during the breaks. Yeah, or just by giving your neighbor a smile when you take your seat, or by fully committing your dedication to this lecture and not doing the dishes in the kitchen at the same time, or I don't know what you are doing here at the moment at the same time. So these exchanges these small exchanges establish ties, and they are essential for trust and community building. And therefore, if we go now back again to the virtual environment, even virtual teams are, of course, encouraged to meet in presence from time to time in order to establish ties. Yeah. Milene and Luisa, yeah, the two of you, you have researched about virtual teams a lot in the ReDICo era that we are in. And I can already tell everybody here that Milene will show an interesting excerpt in a minute and after a short or after an introduction. So Milene, I'm very curious about what is going to come.
Thank you very much, Roman. And well, the point you just raised gave me a very nice starting point to talk to everyone about how I think sociolinguistics can be employed to help us unveil empirically how translocal cultures and communities emerge, or how weak ties become strong ties. Perhaps a good question is, how can all these notions and ideas be operationalized in a research program that investigates digital intercultural communication empirically? I believe that sociolinguistics has much to offer. Let's imagine this picture represents a community of practice. If we want to represent their communication patterns in a graph, it would look like this. Because routines of communication are relatively stable. They might change here and there, but there is usually no big variation. In contrast to a focus on speech communities or even established communities of practice, we seem to have more and more light communities in digital contexts, or communities with weak ties, as Roman just mentioned. Something like this, I'd say. Transient groups where routines are being negotiated in more dynamic ways. Blommaert and Rampton had already called attention to the fact that in super diverse contexts, non-shared knowledge grows in its potential significance for communicative processes. This might be even more so now that digital communities have become so widespread and ubiquitous in our everyday lives. Well, I agree with Blommaert that the congregational work into play in these online communities is crucial. Blommaert built on the work by Garfinkel, Durkheim, among others, and came up with 4 lines of inquiry for sociolinguistics of digital communication. And I'm reading the 4 lines. So number 1 is patterns of communication necessarily involve meaningful social relationships as prerequisite, conduit, and outcome. Number 2, such relationships will always similarly involve identities and categorizations interactionally established. 3, thus when observing patterns of communication, we're observing the very essence of association and groupness, regardless of what we call groups. And number 4, specific patterns of interaction shape specific forms of groups. And speaking of groups, I again quote Blommaert at length here, and he says, he writes the following: groups are not collections of human beings, but patterned sets of communicative behaviors and the relationships with which they are dialectically related. Whenever we see such ordered forms of communicative behavior, there is an assumption of active and evolving groupness, association. But the analytical issue is not the nature of the group or the label we need to choose for it, but the specific social relationships observable through and in communication. All the other aspects of association can be related to this. So if one needs the definition of a group is a communicatively organized and ratified set of social relationships. Because you're talking about an empirical research program, I think it's important to bring some methodological aspects to the scene. Of course, sociolinguistics gives us lots of tools for the analysis of this congregational work. But I believe the bulk of work in conversation analysis can also help us in this endeavor. Well, studies on the emergence and development of interactional practices have been undertaken in conversation analysis through longitudinal studies, especially related to L2 acquisition. More recently, there has been an increased interest in interactional histories, defined as interactional routines that rely on prior joint performances of the same interactional task. These conversation analytic studies that concentrate on micro-interactional phenomena have attested that routines can be evidenced by increased projectability, which means that through time, participants become observably faster at understanding the expected structure of activities and actions and can thus deliver early responses to their interlocutors. Well, but the level of practice I'm interested in is a bit broader than the ones depicted in these conversation analytic studies, I think. Well, let me give you an example. In my ReDICo study in collaboration with Luisa, we brought students from different universities and different countries together to play a so-called virtual intercultural game. And we recorded all those Zoom interactions. It was and still is very interesting to observe the practices used by participants when they first meet, and also how they engage in this congregational work together. So this, what I'm going to show you now, was the first meeting of a group with students from Germany and Finland. Helmi is the first one to introduce this practice, which became a distinctive practice in this group. The practice is the use of self-deprecation comments. So if you take a look at I'm going to show you the videos. I hope they are appearing now for you. Can you see the videos, guys?
Yes.
Yes, okay, very nice. And so the arrow is supposed to help you identify the person who is speaking at each moment. Those are very, very short videos. So let me see. I hope it's going to work.
At least not time management or not project management. I'm not good at managing things.
Okay, so Helmi is saying she's not good at managing things. And then we have Leonardo.
I do not have any skills whatsoever.
All right. And then we have Petra.
Well, great. I'm searching for the sticky note where it says competence for being lost constantly.
And finally, we have Saka.
Hey, so here's my badminton racket. And I do like playing sports, but I'm not really good at any sport I play. At least I think so. But we basically only play for fun with friends like once or twice a week.
All right. So here, what I want to highlight is how important communicative practices are for us to understand how groups evolve and how interculturality becomes culturality. Oh. Okay. Good. And now, I'd like to mention another kind of practice, but this time as an example of how practice can complicate theory, or maybe can help us perhaps rethink theory. But before I go into the empirical part, I need to start with a quick overview of a theoretical resource that informs lots of notions of intercultural communication and intercultural competence. In a special issue of the Interculture journal, Fergal presented scientific historic analysis of the word utopia and explained that the best known proponent of the social psychological utopia concept is probably Ernst Bloch, who sees utopia as a type of consciousness or intention, das Prinzip Hoffnung, or the principle of hope. According to Bloch, hoping is not just interpretation, but a form of action. Hope in the world is materialized via human striving, and it is within human striving where utopianism is to be clearly seen, according to him. Well, I'm not a cultural historian and will not give you a fully fledged background of cyber utopian ideas, but I can tell you roughly that several theories emerged in the early days of the internet, describing it as a tool in service of democratic and decentralized societies. Utopianism can be found in intercultural communication studies. Fergal Lenehan writes, intercultural communication has always been intertwined with perhaps vague ideas concerning the betterment of intercultural understanding and thus a better world. It has always implicitly been centered upon an idea of utopia, albeit gradualist rather than revolutionary type. Well, in my analysis of interactional practices in the scope of the virtual intercultural game I mentioned, I was able to attest some interesting practices. So, for example, in a study with Luisa, we observed how students endorsed each other when discussing who would be responsible for which roles in the game. For example, who would be the project manager, the moderator, and so on. There we saw how much familiarity was important. When some students often endorsed other students they were already acquainted with by mentioning their abilities and thereby their competence to take up certain roles. And here in this slide, there is in this picture is another example. Melissa Stefanovic and I studied decision-making practices in the newly formed groups in the game. Our analysis showed that even though participants were oriented towards inclusion and democratic ideals linked to, for instance, equal participation or no hierarchies and so on, some of the practices were not so conducive of the ideals of inclusion they had in mind. So in short, we must admit that we don't always practice what we preach, which complicates theories or even empirical studies of, for example, intercultural processes that are based solely on people's perceptions of their own and others' behaviors. Well, this insight that a close look into practice is paramount this insight that a close look into practice is so important. Leads us to understand and highlight the fact that for us to describe social processes, we need to confront theory with practice. And actually what I wanted to say is this insight is not mine. Of course, there have been lots of people, especially sociolinguists, highlighting exactly this. And here I brought a quote by Blomert, who wrote that scientists need the messiness and chaos of actual confrontations with empirical cases and data in order to arrive at systematic theories, which then must again be used in practices of scientific problem solving.
So this is actually what we did, Milene, this apparent, at least mess. So this is what we did in the study that Milene described, combining didactics with research and also using different empirical methods at the same time in order to identify some core factors that influence community sustainability far beyond just the digital space. And here I'd like to come back to what I said earlier about digital inequalities as the main barrier to constructive engagement and therefore to community sustainability, whether it's a school class, a virtual team, or a wider community. A fundamental barrier is related to unbalanced power relationships connected with different kinds of prejudices rooted, for example, in racism. For this reason, I brought here an image of a campaign which had been done in Saxony in order to sensitize people about racist issues. Though unbalanced power relationship can develop during the interaction, for example, because of different language proficiency. Yeah, here we invite you to watch our educasts and where we give some insights on our results. The internet has therefore an enormous potential to bring people together and help them grow together, but for that very reason is also a threat to the development of a democratic, inclusive, and sustainable society. A key factor that is not often mentioned in the literature, but which was one of our most surprising observations in the recent study that Fergal and I did on interactions around selected news stories on social media, is the powerful sense of community that seemed to be particularly easy to create around news stories that generated fear and played on prejudices. So as you can see here in this image, you see how many thumb ups and laughs and everyone agree on very easy things which are completely wrong but sounds normal. And this creating community through supporting each other is really very, very powerful and still not as much lightened as it should. So we are social beings, and that is a key issue.
All right. Yes, thank you very much, Luisa. And I think we're ready to transition into our concluding remarks. And we planned this part in a way that, so each of us is going to come in very quickly and give their take on this notion of digital interculturality. So I'd like to invite Fergal to get it started there.
Thank you, Milene. As everybody has seen, I suppose we all generally view digital interculturality in a very pluralistic manner. For me, it is most logical to view this as the totality of possible digital interconnections, whether of greater meaning or not, aspects of which may then be isolated and studied from different perspectives, especially from ongoing theoretical perspectives such as post-digitality, platformization, agency, and materiality. And this means then that actually internet histories is actually also the history of digital interculturality. It is then the history of technological relationships, actually.
What I would like to say here as last words on digital interculturality as a disciplinary area is on one side that it's about exploiting the digital as a privileged research environment. Yeah, I brought here the picture you saw before, the excerpt of the video. So through the internet, we really could observe what are people saying, how they are interacting, and we could, through other methodologies, obviously ask also for their opinion. But really, the internet is a possibility we have to look inside the world, which we don't have so much in the material world, or not in that form, I would say. So this is something which characterizes digital interculturality. And there are two more aspects which are more related to the content. And I would like to highlight the fact that digital interculturality is not just about the digital. What we have tried to show is that we cannot separate the digital and the not digital anymore, and so it's not about limiting ourselves to the digital space, even if it's an absolutely important field of the digital interculturality. It can also have to do with processes of digital interculturality offline, which though consider very consciously the influence of the digital on it. So beyond the digital, I wrote to explain this. And then I wrote beyond interculturality, in the sense that very often interculturality, as also I said before, is referred to internationality or something like that. And actually we have tried also to show with our presentation that interculturality is way beyond this traditional classic understanding of cultures and therefore culturality and interculturality. So it has to do with the encounter of unfamiliarity, uncertainty.
Yeah, thank you. Just to summarize my contributions today, I wanted to stress the ubiquity of digitality, but also the ubiquity and the shifting locality of interculturality. And there are two ubiquitous elements that could be brought and thought together more often. So being thrown into this hybrid, unspecific, hyper-complex, post-digital and also intercultural environment is a lot linked to aspects that we actually know very well already from our usual intercultural studies perspective. All these questions, how to deal with the lack of plausibility, with the lack of predictability and the lack of familiarity. Yeah, and therefore from our intercultural studies perspective, I think we indeed have something to contribute to it. And then my vision to see digital interculturality is to see it as an empirical approach to intercultural discourses, practices, and social negotiations that take place under the influence of digital tools and platforms. And here, I think we can contribute to the deconstruction and to the understanding of ongoing social developments that have an increasing importance for individuals and then for collectives and then for society as a whole.
Thank you, Roman. I think your vision matches my vision quite well, because my vision of digital interculturality is oriented toward the investigation of practice, more specifically socio-communicative practices that can offer us a perspective on digital intercultural processes. Ideally, we'll be able to analyze them from the perspective of the here and now of interaction, and at the same time, take into account what Ben Rampton calls historically shaped communicative sensibilities that speakers bring to the communicative setting. Well, and to conclude, I would just like to mention the following. The ReDICo project as a whole is an attempt to get a holistic understanding of digital interculturality. This understanding of digital interculturality we are presenting here is very much a result of our individual lenses on the phenomenon. A group formed by other researchers from other disciplinary backgrounds would probably have come up with another framing. And here we do agree with Strauss, who argues that the imaginative dimension of theory building can help us by enhancing sensitivities to what otherwise might be overlooked, and it can minimize becoming captive of overly simple explanatory models or doctrines that are claimed as interpreting or explaining human life and behavior. And to this, Blommaert adds the following: rather than constraining thought, I see theory as liberating, as a tool that enables us to to explore further and think what has not been thought before. Well, we agree with Blommaert and hope to continue this explorative, theoretical, and empirical exercise in collaboration with all of you. Thank you very much. And here are our references. Thank you.